The smell of my mother's famous pot roast filled the dining room of our modest two-story colonial house in suburban Cleveland, Ohio, as my family gathered for our monthly Sunday dinner. It was October 2019, and the autumn leaves outside painted a beautiful backdrop through the large window that overlooked our backyard where my father had built a wooden swing set 20 years earlier. But the warmth of the season couldn't penetrate the cold tension that always seemed to settle over our family gatherings whenever the topic of success came up. My name is Marcus Thompson, and at 28 years old, I had become the family's unofficial disappointment. While my younger sister Sophia, 25, was celebrated as the golden child who could do no wrong, I was consistently treated as the family member who just couldn't get his act together. This perception had been carefully cultivated over years of subtle and not-so-subtle comparisons that always left me on the losing end. Our family dynamic had been established early and reinforced relentlessly throughout our childhood and into adulthood. Sophia was beautiful, charismatic, and effortlessly successful at everything she touched. She had graduated summa cum laude from Ohio State University with a degree in marketing, immediately landed a prestigious position at a Fortune 500 company in Columbus, and seemed to glide through life without ever encountering the obstacles that constantly tripped me up. I, on the other hand, had taken what everyone considered the unconventional path. After graduating from community college with an associate degree in computer programming, I had bounced between various IT jobs, never seeming to find my footing in the traditional corporate world. What my family didn't understand, and what I had never bothered to explain, was that I wasn't struggling to find success. I was quietly building something much bigger than any of them could imagine. The dining room where we gathered every month was a shrine to Sophia's achievements. The walls were adorned with her graduation photos, awards from her company, and framed newspaper clippings featuring her participation in various charity events and business conferences. My parents, Richard and Linda Thompson, both retired school teachers, had always been proud educators who valued traditional markers of success, degrees, stable employment, social recognition, and financial security that came through conventional means. As we settled around the mahogany dining table that had been a wedding gift to my parents 35 years earlier, the conversation inevitably turned to career updates and life achievements. This was the part of every family gathering that I had learned to dread, because it always followed the same predictable pattern. Sophia would share news of her latest promotion, raise, or professional recognition, while I would be questioned about my still uncertain career path. "So, Marcus," my father began, cutting into his pot roast with the deliberate precision that characterized everything he did, "how's the job situation going? Are you still doing that computer stuff for different companies?" The way he said, "computer stuff," made it sound like I was playing video games for a living rather than building complex software systems that generated substantial revenue. I had long since stopped trying to explain the intricacies of software development, database architecture, and the growing field of financial technology to parents who still struggled to understand why anyone would need more than one email address. "I'm working on some interesting projects," I replied diplomatically, taking a sip of the red wine that Sophia had brought, an expensive bottle that she made sure everyone knew cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. Mostly in the fintech space, helping companies streamline their financial operations. "That sounds technical," my mother said with the kind of polite smile she reserved for conversations she didn't understand or find particularly interesting. "But are you making good money? Because at your age, you really should be thinking about settling down, buying a house, starting a family." Before I could respond, Sophia jumped into the conversation with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for her moment to shine. "Actually, Mom, I have some exciting news to share with everyone." The entire atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. My parents' faces lit up with anticipation, and even my Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim, who had joined us for dinner, turned their full attention to Sophia. It was like watching a spotlight swing from a dimly lit corner to center stage. "I got the promotion," Sophia announced, practically glowing with excitement. "I'm now the regional marketing director for the entire Midwest division. It comes with a $40,000 salary increase, a company car, and a corner office on the 20th floor." The celebration that followed was exactly what I had expected. My parents jumped up from their seats to hug her, my Aunt Carol started crying with joy, and my Uncle Jim began talking about how proud his brother, my father, must be to have raised such an accomplished daughter. The congratulations flowed for nearly 15 minutes, with everyone asking detailed questions about her new responsibilities, the size of her team, and the impressive benefits package that came with her new position. During this celebration, I sat quietly in my chair, mechanically eating my dinner while observing the family dynamics that had defined my entire life. I wasn't bitter about Sophia's success. She had worked hard and deserved recognition for her achievements. What stung was the contrast in how our respective accomplishments were received and valued by our family. 6 months earlier, I had quietly sold a financial planning app that I had developed in my spare time to a major investment firm for $2.3 million. It was the culmination of 3 years of 18-hour days, learning advanced programming languages, understanding complex financial regulations, and building something that solved real problems for people managing their retirement investments. But when I had mentioned this achievement during a previous family dinner, it was dismissed as lucky timing and probably not sustainable income. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Sophia was being celebrated for earning a salary that would total less than half of what I had made from that single sale, my achievement was considered somehow less legitimate because it didn't fit the traditional model of employment that my parents understood and valued. As the excitement about Sophia's promotion began to settle, the conversation took the turn that would change everything between us forever. My father, emboldened by wine and the joy of his daughter's success, decided it was time for one of his life lessons talks. "You know, Marcus," he said, leaning back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man who believed he was about to dispense profound wisdom, "you should really look at your sister as an example. She's focused, driven, and she understands the importance of stability and conventional success." My mother nodded in agreement, adding, "Sophia has always been so responsible and mature. She makes decisions based on practical considerations, not just following whatever trend catches her fancy." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that always accompanied these family interventions, but I forced myself to remain calm and simply listen. I had learned over the years that defending myself only made these conversations worse, so I had developed a strategy of polite nodding until the storm passed. But Sophia, riding high on the wave of family adoration and perhaps emboldened by the wine, decided to take the conversation in a direction that would prove to be a catastrophic miscalculation. "Honestly," she said, her voice carrying the confident tone of someone who believed she was among allies, "I think Marcus needs to stop treating the family like his personal safety net. It's not fair to Mom and Dad that they're still worrying about his finances and his future at their age." The room fell silent. Even my Aunt Carol stopped mid-chew and looked between Sophia and me with obvious discomfort. But Sophia, apparently interpreting the silence as encouragement rather than warning, pressed on. "I mean, let's be honest here," she continued, setting down her wine glass with emphasis. "Marcus has been the deadweight in this family for years. He jumps from job to job, never commits to anything long-term, and meanwhile, Mom and Dad are still sacrificing their own financial security to help support his unstable lifestyle." The word deadweight hit me like a physical blow. Not because I believed it was true, but because of how casually she said it, how comfortable she seemed using such a cruel term to describe her own brother in front of our entire family. The worst part was that no one contradicted her. My parents exchanged a meaningful glance. My aunt and uncle suddenly became very interested in their food, and the silence stretched on until it became its own form of agreement. "Sophia's not wrong," my father said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "Marcus, we love you, but at 28, you should be contributing more to this family instead of being someone we have to worry about all the time." My mother reached across the table and patted my hand with the kind of condescending sympathy usually reserved for sick children. "Honey, we just want you to find some stability. Look at how proud Sophia makes us feel. Wouldn't you like to experience that kind of success?" In that moment, sitting around the table where I had eaten thousands of meals throughout my childhood, I realized that my family had constructed a complete narrative about my life that bore no resemblance to reality. They had decided I was a failure, and no amount of actual success would change their perception because they had never bothered to understand what I was actually doing with my life. But more than that, I realized that Sophia had crossed a line. Calling me deadweight wasn't just an insult, it was a deliberate attempt to diminish my standing in the family hierarchy. She wasn't content with being the favorite, she wanted to actively undermine any possibility that I might be seen as valuable or successful in my own right. You know what, I said, standing up from the table with careful composure, I think I should probably head home. Thank you for dinner, Mom. It was delicious as always. Marcus, don't leave upset, my mother said, but her tone suggested that she was more concerned about social awkwardness than my feelings. Sophia was just trying to help. I'm not upset, I lied smoothly. I just have an early morning tomorrow. I need to review some contracts. As I gathered my jacket and car keys, I could hear Sophia explaining to the table that she hadn't meant to hurt my feelings, but that sometimes tough love was necessary to help people face reality. The conversation continued without missing a beat, as if my departure was simply clearing away an obstacle to their enjoyment of the evening. Driving home to my apartment in downtown Cleveland, I replayed the evening's events over and over in my mind. The casual cruelty of being called deadweight, the assumption that I was a financial burden, the complete dismissal of my actual achievements, it all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity about what I needed to do next. I wasn't going to defend myself with words. I wasn't going to try to explain or justify my life choices to people who had already made up their minds about me. Instead, I was going to let my actions speak for themselves, and when the time was right, I would reveal exactly who had been supporting whom in this family. Because there was one crucial piece of information that my family didn't know, one detail that would reframe every assumption they had made about my financial situation and my contribution to the family. 6 months earlier, when my parents had received an anonymous payment that completely paid off their mortgage, a debt that had been hanging over their heads for 23 years, they had assumed it was some kind of banking error or unexpected inheritance. It wasn't. It was me. Using a portion of the money from my app sale, I had quietly paid off their $127,000 remaining mortgage balance, choosing to do it anonymously because I wanted them to enjoy the relief without feeling obligated to acknowledge my success or change their perception of me. I had planned to eventually reveal the truth during a moment when it might help improve our relationship. But now, after being called deadweight in front of the entire family, I had a better idea. I would let Sophia continue to believe that she was the family's financial success story. I would let my parents continue to worry about my unstable career. And when the moment was right, when the contrast between perception and reality could create the maximum impact, I would reveal not just that I had paid off their house, but that my supposedly unsuccessful career had made me financially capable of solving their biggest problem without even making a significant dent in my own resources. The revenge wouldn't be cruel or destructive. It would simply be the truth, revealed at the moment when it would force everyone to confront how completely wrong they had been about me. And for someone who had spent years being underestimated and dismissed, that moment of recognition would be sweeter than any traditional form of revenge. As I pulled into the parking garage of my downtown apartment building, a luxury high-rise that I could afford because of my unstable career, I realized that Sophia had unwittingly given me the perfect motivation to take my success to the next level. Being called deadweight by someone who had no idea about my actual financial situation wasn't just an insult, it was a challenge. Over the next few months, I would build something so undeniably successful that even my family's capacity for denial would be overwhelmed. And when that moment came, when the truth about who had really been supporting whom became impossible to ignore, I would make sure that Sophia's deadweight comment was remembered by everyone who heard it. The best revenge, I had learned, wasn't getting even. It was getting so far ahead that the people who underestimated you had no choice but to look up at you from behind. The Monday morning after that disastrous family dinner, I woke up in my downtown Cleveland apartment with a clarity of purpose that felt almost electric. The floor-to-ceiling windows of my 28th floor unit overlooked Lake Erie, and as I watched the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold and amber, I made a decision that would change not only my life but ultimately my family's understanding of what success actually looked like. My apartment was a testament to the success that my family couldn't see or understand. The 1,800 square foot space featured modern minimalist design, smart home technology integrated into every system, and a dedicated office space with 3 curved monitors that displayed real-time data from the various software projects I was developing. But to my family, because I didn't have a traditional office building and business cards with impressive titles, I was still just playing with computers. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Sophia celebrated her $40,000 raise, my monthly passive income from the 3 apps I had already built and sold exceeded her entire annual salary. But numbers on a screen weren't something my family could understand or respect the way they could understand a corner office and a company car. That morning, I opened my laptop and began working on what would become the most ambitious project of my career, a comprehensive financial management platform designed specifically for small business owners who needed sophisticated tools but couldn't afford the enterprise-level software that larger companies used. I had identified a gap in the market during my consulting work with various local businesses, and I knew that if I could build something elegant, powerful, and accessible, it would solve real problems for hundreds of thousands of entrepreneurs across the country. The difference this time was that I wasn't just building software, I was building a company. Over the next 6 months, I would need to develop not only the technical platform but also establish a business entity, build a team, create a marketing strategy, and position myself as the founder and CEO of something substantial and visible. This wouldn't be a quiet sale to a larger corporation, this would be a company that would grow, scale, and eventually become impossible for anyone to dismiss as just computer stuff. My daily routine became monastic in its discipline. I woke at 5 a.m., spent the first hour planning my day and reviewing market research, then worked on development until 9 a.m. From 9 to 11, I handled client calls and consulting work that provided steady income while I built my larger project. The rest of the day was devoted to the new platform, often working until midnight or later. During this period, my family's monthly dinners continued, and I continued to attend them, playing the role of the struggling younger brother while quietly building something extraordinary. The conversations followed predictable patterns. Sophia would share updates about her corporate achievements, my parents would express concern about my lack of direction, and I would offer vague responses about working on various projects. In November, Sophia announced that she had been featured in her company's internal newsletter as Rising Star of the Quarter, and my parents spent 20 minutes discussing how proud they were and how this recognition would surely lead to even greater opportunities. When my father asked about my work, I mentioned that I was developing a business management platform for small companies, which earned polite nods and a quick change of subject to discuss Sophia's upcoming presentation at a regional marketing conference. What they didn't know was that by November, I had already filed incorporation papers for Thomson Solutions LLC, trademarked the name BizFlow Pro for my platform, and begun building a team of freelance developers to help accelerate the development process. I had also started beta testing with a select group of small business owners who were providing feedback that would shape the final product. The beta testing phase revealed something exciting. The platform wasn't just solving problems, it was transforming how these small businesses operated. Restaurant owners were streamlining their inventory management, retail shops were optimizing their staffing schedules, and service-based businesses were automating their client billing in ways that saved them hours every week. The testimonials I was receiving weren't just positive, they were enthusiastic endorsements from people who felt like I had created something that understood their specific challenges. By December, I had a waiting list of over 500 businesses who wanted access to the full platform, and I hadn't even launched my marketing campaign yet. The demand was organic, growing through word-of-mouth recommendations from the beta users who were seeing real improvements in their operations and profitability. During the December family dinner, Sophia shared that she would be receiving a performance bonus of $8,000 for exceeding her quarterly goals, and the family celebration was extensive. My Aunt Carol mentioned that she had bragged to her book club about having such a successful niece, and my Uncle Jim joked that Sophia should start giving financial advice to the rest of the family. Marcus should really pay attention to how Sophia approaches her career, my mother suggested, serving everyone her famous apple pie. She sets goals, works systematically toward them, and gets recognized for her results. I think Marcus is doing fine in his own way, Sophia said, and I could hear the condescension disguised as sisterly support. Not everyone is cut out for the corporate world. Some people are better suited for more flexible arrangements. The deadweight comment from October still hung in the air unspoken, but its implications colored every interaction. I was the family member who needed patience and understanding, while Sophia was the one who made everyone proud. The narrative was so entrenched that when I mentioned I was planning to officially launch my platform in February, my father's response was to ask if I had a backup plan, in case it didn't work out. Starting a business is risky, son, he said with paternal concern. You might want to consider finding a stable job first and treating this as a side project until you know it's viable. The advice was well-intentioned but completely missed the point that I was already making more money than anyone at the table realized. My consulting income alone was approaching 6 figures annually, and that was just my part-time work while I built something much larger. January 2020 became a month of intense preparation for the launch. I finalized partnerships with payment processors, established customer service protocols, and created a marketing campaign that would introduce BizFlow Pro to the broader market. I also made a decision that would prove crucial for the eventual revelation to my family. I hired a PR firm to help position me not just as a software developer, but as a business leader and entrepreneur. Marcus, what we're going to do is build your personal brand alongside the product launch, explained Sarah Martinez, the publicist I had hired from a well-respected Cleveland marketing firm. Small business ownership is a story that resonates with people, especially when it's local entrepreneur made good. We're going to get you featured in the business section of The Plain Dealer, interviewed on local business radio shows, and positioned as an expert in small business technology solutions. The strategy was brilliant because it would create local recognition that my family couldn't ignore or dismiss. Being featured in the city's major newspaper wasn't something that could be explained away as computer stuff or unstable career choices. It was the kind of visible success that my parents understood and valued. In February 2020, BizFlow Pro officially launched with a coordinated campaign that included social media advertising, partnerships with small business associations, and targeted outreach to industry publications. Within the first week, we had over 200 paying customers, and the subscription revenue was growing by 15 to 20% each week. But the real breakthrough came in March, when the Plain Dealer business section featured a full-page article titled, "Local Entrepreneur Helps Small Businesses Thrive with Innovative Software Solution." The article included a professional photo of me in my downtown office. I had rented a proper office space to look more legitimate for media purposes, quotes about my vision for democratizing business technology, and details about BizFlow Pro's rapid growth. The article also mentioned that Thompson Solutions LLC was on track to generate over $2 million in revenue during its first year, and that I was already in discussions with investors who were interested in funding expansion into additional markets. I found out that my family had seen the article when my phone started ringing on Tuesday morning. First my mother, then my father, then my Aunt Carol, all calling to express their surprise and pride about the newspaper coverage. But the most interesting call came from Sophia. "Marcus, I had no idea you were doing so well with your business," she said, and I could hear genuine confusion in her voice. "The article made it sound like you're really successful. Why didn't you tell us about all this?" "I did tell you," I replied calmly. "I've been talking about the platform for months. But you guys always seemed more interested in discussing other things." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her mentally reviewing our recent family conversations, trying to reconcile the image of her deadweight brother with the successful entrepreneur featured in the newspaper. "Well, anyway, congratulations," she said finally. "I guess I underestimated what you were building." The March family dinner was noticeably different from previous gatherings. Instead of worried questions about my career stability, I was asked detailed questions about my business model, my customer base, and my growth projections. My parents still seemed somewhat confused about how someone could build a successful company without traditional employment, but they couldn't argue with newspaper coverage and documented revenue growth. "We're so proud of you, Marcus," my mother said, though her tone suggested she was still processing this new information about my success. "I guess we didn't really understand what you were working on." "It's exciting that both of our children are doing so well in their careers," my father added diplomatically, clearly trying to maintain balance between celebrating my success and not diminishing Sophia's achievements. But I noticed that Sophia was quieter than usual during this dinner. She congratulated me on the article and asked appropriate questions about the business, but she seemed uncomfortable with the shift in family dynamics that acknowledged me as successful rather than struggling. Over the following months, as BizFlow Pro continued to grow and gain recognition in the local business community, the contrast between my actual success and my family's long-held perceptions became increasingly difficult to ignore. I was invited to speak at the Cleveland Chamber of Commerce, featured in Ohio Business Magazine, and asked to serve on a panel about entrepreneurship at Cleveland State University. Each recognition further established my credibility and forced my family to confront the reality that their deadweight member was actually building something significant and valuable. But I still hadn't revealed the most important piece of information. that their mortgage had been paid off using money from my previous business success. That revelation was being saved for the perfect moment, a moment that would come sooner than I expected, and would force a reckoning with years of assumptions and family mythology that had cast me as the unsuccessful sibling who needed patience and support. By August 2020, BizFlow Pro had over 2,000 customers, $3.5 million in annual recurring revenue, and a team of 12 employees. I had moved from my downtown apartment to a suburban house with a dedicated home office, and I was driving a Tesla Model S that I had purchased with cash from the business profits. But more importantly, I had built something that my family could finally see and understand as legitimate success. The foundation was laid for the revelation that would reframe everything they thought they knew about who had really been supporting whom in our family dynamic. The only question remaining was when and how to deliver the truth about their mortgage in a way that would create maximum impact and ensure that the word deadweight would never be used to describe me again. By September 2020, BizFlow Pro had evolved from a promising startup into a genuine business success story that was beginning to attract attention far beyond Cleveland's local business community. Incorporated magazine had featured us in their Companies to Watch section, and I was fielding calls from venture capital firms who wanted to discuss growth funding and expansion opportunities. The momentum was building towards something much larger than I had initially envisioned, and I realized that my family's understanding of my success was still only scratching the surface. They saw the newspaper articles and the local recognition, but they had no idea about the financial reality of what I had built or the level of interest it was generating from major investors and industry leaders. During our September family dinner, the dynamics had shifted significantly from the previous year's gatherings. Instead of concerns about my career stability, the conversation now included questions about my business strategy and admiration for my entrepreneurial success. But I could sense an undercurrent of adjustment as everyone, particularly Sophia, adapted to the new reality that I was no longer the family member who needed guidance and support. "Marcus, your father and I have been talking," my mother began as we finished our meal, "and we want you to know how proud we are of what you've accomplished. We may not have understood what you were working on at first, but it's clear that you knew what you were doing all along." It was as close to an apology as I was likely to receive for years of dismissive treatment, and I appreciated the gesture even though it couldn't undo the emotional impact of being consistently underestimated by the people who were supposed to believe in me most. "I also want to apologize," Sophia added, her voice carrying genuine remorse, "for some of the things I said last year. I clearly didn't understand what you were building, and I shouldn't have made assumptions about your financial situation or your contribution to the family." The apology was welcome, but it also felt somewhat hollow because it focused on her misunderstanding of my business success rather than acknowledging the deeper issue of how easily she had dismissed my value as a person and family member. The deadweight comment hadn't just been about money, it had been about her perception that I was fundamentally less valuable than she was. But I accepted her apology graciously and steered the conversation toward future plans and opportunities. I wasn't ready for the full revelation yet, because I wanted to wait until my success was so undeniable and substantial that it would create a moment of perfect contrast with their previous assumptions. That moment came sooner than expected, in the form of an opportunity that would catapult both my business and my personal recognition to a completely different level. In October 2020, I received a call from Jennifer Walsh, a senior producer at CNBC who was working on a segment about small business technology solutions that had thrived during the COVID-19 pandemic. BizFlow Pro had actually benefited from the economic disruption because more businesses were looking for efficient, cloud-based tools to manage remote operations and optimize their limited resources. "Marcus, we'd like to feature you and BizFlow Pro in a segment about entrepreneurs who are solving real problems for small businesses during challenging economic times," Jennifer explained during our initial conversation. "Your platform has been mentioned by several business owners as a crucial tool that helped them survive and even grow during the pandemic." A CNBC feature was exactly the kind of national recognition that would establish my credibility beyond any possible doubt. It wasn't local news or industry publications, it was a major financial network that reached millions of viewers and was considered the authority on business success and innovation. The filming took place at my office in downtown Cleveland, with the CNBC crew spending an entire day capturing interviews, footage of my team at work, and demonstrations of the BizFlow Pro platform. During the interview, I was asked about my background, my inspiration for creating the platform, and my vision for the company's future. What's interesting about your story, Marcus, the reporter said during our on-camera conversation, is that you've built this successful company while maintaining strong ties to your local community. Tell us about the role family support played in your entrepreneurial journey. It was an ironic question, given that my family had actually been skeptical of my entrepreneurial path until very recently. But I answered diplomatically, focusing on how their traditional values had taught me the importance of hard work and persistence, even if they hadn't initially understood the specific direction I was taking. The CNBC segment aired in November 2020, during prime business programming hours, and the impact was immediate and dramatic. The day after the broadcast, BizFlow Pro's website received over 50,000 visits, our sales team fielded hundreds of inquiry calls, and my email inbox was flooded with messages from potential customers, investors, and business partners who had seen the feature. More importantly for the eventual family revelation, the CNBC appearance established me as a nationally recognized business leader whose success could no longer be questioned or minimized. When the founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar company appears on CNBC to discuss business strategy and market opportunities, it's impossible to characterize that person as unstable or unsuccessful. My family's reaction to the CNBC feature was exactly what I had expected, a mixture of pride, surprise, and apparent recalibration of their understanding of my success. My phone rang all day with calls from relatives, family friends, and even my high school teachers who had seen the segment and wanted to congratulate me. "Marcus, we watched you on CNBC last night," my mother said when she called that morning, her voice filled with excitement and what sounded like genuine amazement. "I kept telling everyone, that's my son. That's my son. I recorded it so we can watch it again." My father called later to say that his former colleagues at the school district had been asking about me all morning, and that he was proud to be able to tell them about my success. Even my Aunt Carol mentioned that she had posted about the CNBC feature on Facebook and received dozens of congratulatory comments from people who remembered me from childhood. But the most interesting reaction came from Sophia, who called that evening with what seemed like carefully prepared comments. "Marcus, I watched the CNBC segment, and I'm really impressed with how articulate and confident you were," she said. "You clearly know your industry inside and out, and it's obvious that you've built something really substantial." There was something in her tone that suggested she was still processing this new reality of having a brother who had achieved national recognition for business success. For someone who had been accustomed to being the family's star performer, my CNBC appearance represented a significant shift in the family hierarchy of achievement. The November family dinner was unlike any gathering we had ever had. Instead of the usual updates about corporate promotions and workplace achievements, the entire conversation revolved around my CNBC appearance, the growth of BizFlow Pro, and the investor interest that was developing as a result of the national exposure. "Marcus, can you explain to us how the investor process works?" my father asked with genuine curiosity. "The reporter mentioned that you're considering growth funding, but I don't really understand what that means for you and the company." I spent nearly an hour explaining venture capital, equity stakes, valuation methods, and growth strategies, realizing that this was the first time my family had ever asked detailed questions about my work with genuine interest rather than polite concern. They were finally seeing me as someone who possessed expertise worth understanding rather than someone who needed their guidance and worry. "It's amazing that you built all of this yourself," my Uncle Jim commented. "When you were younger, I never would have imagined that you'd become this kind of business leader. You were always smart, but this is really something special." The acknowledgement felt good, but it also highlighted how completely my family had failed to recognize my potential during the years when their support and belief would have meant the most. They were congratulating me now for exceeding expectations that had been set artificially low by their own limitations in understanding what I was capable of achieving. December 2020 brought news that would set the stage for the perfect moment to reveal the truth about their mortgage. 3 different venture capital firms had made offers to invest in BizFlow Pro, with valuations ranging from $25 million to $40 million for the company. After careful consideration and extensive due diligence, I accepted a $15 million investment from Meridian Ventures, a respected Cleveland-based firm, in exchange for a 30% equity stake. The investment wasn't just about money. It was about validation from professional investors who evaluated hundreds of business opportunities and chose to bet their own credibility and capital on my company's potential for success. It was also about having the resources to expand nationally and potentially build BizFlow Pro into a major player in the business software industry. When the investment was announced in the local business press in January 2021, it created another wave of attention and recognition. The Plain Dealer business section featured another article, this time focused on the investment and what it meant for Cleveland's growing technology sector. The article mentioned that the investment made me one of the youngest entrepreneurs in Ohio to receive venture capital funding at this level. But more importantly for my family situation, the article included details about the company's valuation and my personal net worth as majority owner of a business now valued at $40 million. Even accounting for the equity I had sold to investors, my remaining stake was worth approximately $25 million, and that didn't include the cash I had received from the investment or the profits I had already taken from the business over the previous year. The February 2021 family dinner was scheduled to take place just 2 weeks after the investment announcement, and I knew it would be the perfect setting for the revelation I had been planning for over a year. My family would be in a celebratory mood, feeling proud of my success and probably somewhat guilty about their previous skepticism. The contrast between their current admiration and their past dismissal would create the ideal emotional context for revealing the truth about their mortgage. But before that dinner, I wanted to prepare one final piece of the revelation. I contacted the mortgage company that had serviced my parents' loan and requested detailed documentation of the payoff transaction, including records that showed the payment had come from my personal account. I also gathered screenshots of the bank transfer, copies of the cashier's check that had been used to pay off the balance, and a timeline that showed the payment had been made just weeks after my first successful app sale. The documentation would prove not only that I had paid off their mortgage, but that I had done so at a time when my family still considered me a financial burden who needed their support and patience. The contrast would be undeniable. While they were worrying about my ability to support myself, I was quietly solving their biggest financial problem. I also prepared a letter that I would read to them during the dinner, explaining my decision to pay off their mortgage anonymously and my reasons for revealing the truth now. The letter was carefully crafted to express love and gratitude for their support throughout my life, while also making clear that their assumptions about my financial situation and my value to the family had been completely wrong. As February 14th approached, the date of our monthly family dinner, I felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness that reminded me of the feeling before a major business presentation. This wouldn't just be a revelation. It would be a moment that redefined my relationship with my family and forced everyone to confront how their perceptions and assumptions had shaped our family dynamics for years. The stage was set for a conversation that would ensure the word deadweight would never be applied to me again, and that would establish once and for all who had really been supporting whom in the Thompson family hierarchy. Valentine's Day 2021 fell on a Sunday, which meant our monthly family dinner was scheduled for the same day. The irony wasn't lost on me that I would be revealing the truth about love, support, and family on the day traditionally dedicated to expressing affection and appreciation for the people who matter most in our lives. I arrived at my parents' house in my Tesla Model S, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne and a manila envelope that contained the documentation of their mortgage payoff. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the significance of what it represented and the conversation it would trigger. The house looked exactly the same as it had during that fateful October dinner 16 months earlier, but everything else had changed dramatically. Where I had once been seen as the struggling family member who needed patience and guidance, I was now viewed as the successful entrepreneur whose achievements brought pride and recognition to the entire family. My parents greeted me with the warmth and enthusiasm that had become standard since my business success had become public knowledge. They asked about the venture capital investment, about my expansion plans, and about the media attention that continued to follow BizFlow Pro's growth and development. "Marcus, Mrs. Peterson from next door saw your interview on that business show," my mother said as she prepared her famous lasagna. "She said you looked so professional and confident. We're just so proud of how you've turned out." The phrase, "turned out," struck me as telling, because it implied that there had been doubt about how I would develop as an adult. It was a reminder that despite their current pride, my parents had spent years genuinely worried that I would never achieve the kind of success they valued and understood. Sophia arrived shortly after me, bringing her boyfriend David, whom she had been dating for about 6 months. David worked in pharmaceutical sales and seemed like a decent guy, though he had the slightly overwhelmed demeanor of someone still adjusting to the dynamics of a family that wasn't his own. "Marcus, David has been excited to meet you ever since he saw the CNBC feature," Sophia said as she made introductions. He's actually thinking about starting his own business, and I told him you'd be a great person to get advice from. The conversation that followed was a perfect illustration of how completely the family dynamics had shifted. David asked thoughtful questions about entrepreneurship, funding, and business development, while my parents and Sophia listened with obvious pride as I shared insights about building a company from scratch. It was a surreal experience to be positioned as the family expert on success and achievement, given that just 16 months earlier, I had been dismissed as someone who couldn't get his life together. But I played the role graciously, offering genuine advice while internally preparing for the conversation that would reframe everyone's understanding of our family's financial history. During dinner, the conversation naturally turned to future plans and family developments. Sophia mentioned that she and David were discussing moving in together and possibly looking at buying a house in the next year or two. My parents talked about their retirement plans and how grateful they felt to be financially secure during their golden years. It's such a relief not to have that mortgage hanging over our heads anymore, my father said, cutting another piece of lasagna. When that payment got made last year, it felt like winning the lottery. We still don't really understand how it happened, but we're not questioning our good fortune. The bank said it was some kind of anonymous benefactor, my mother added. We've always wondered if it was maybe one of your father's former students who became successful, or possibly a distant relative we didn't know about. But whoever it was, they changed our lives. This was the opening I had been waiting for. The conversation had naturally arrived at the topic of their mortgage, and they had expressed their gratitude for the anonymous payment that had freed them from decades of debt. The timing was perfect for revealing the truth in a way that would maximize the emotional impact. Actually, I said, setting down my fork and reaching for the manila envelope I had brought, I have something I need to tell you about that mortgage payment. The entire table fell silent. My parents looked at me with curiosity, Sophia's expression was puzzled, and David clearly sensed that something significant was about to happen. The anonymous benefactor wasn't a former student or a distant relative, I continued, opening the envelope and removing the documentation I had prepared. It was me. I paid off your mortgage in March 2020. The silence that followed was complete and profound. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth, my father's eyes widened with shock, and Sophia stared at me as if I had just announced that I was actually an alien from another planet. Marcus, my mother whispered, what are you saying? Instead of answering immediately, I spread the documentation across the table, bank statements showing the transfer of $127,000 from my account, copies of the cashier's check made out to their mortgage company, and the official payoff notification that showed the exact date and amount of the transaction. In February 2020, I sold my first app to a major investment firm for $2.3 million, I explained, my voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. I used part of that money to pay off your mortgage because I wanted you to enjoy your retirement without the stress of that monthly payment. My father picked up one of the bank statements with trembling hands, studying the numbers as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Marcus, this is $127,000. You paid off our entire mortgage? Yes, sir. I did it anonymously because I didn't want you to feel obligated to change your opinion of me or treat me differently. I just wanted you to have that financial freedom. Sophia was staring at the documentation with an expression that combined shock, confusion, and what appeared to be dawning realization about the implications of what I was revealing. But Marcus, she said slowly, this payment was made in March 2020. That was. She paused, clearly working through the timeline in her head. That was right around the time you called me Deadweight at our family dinner, I finished gently. In fact, it was about 6 weeks after that conversation. The emotional impact of this revelation hit the table like a physical force. My mother gasped and covered her mouth with her hands, my father's face went pale, and Sophia looked as if she might be sick. You mean, my mother said through tears that had started flowing, when we were worried about your finances and telling you to get stable employment, you had already made enough money to pay off our house? Yes, ma'am. And I had done it because I love you and wanted to help, even though you didn't believe I was capable of helping myself. The silence returned, but this time it was heavy with the weight of recognition and regret. My parents were clearly processing the magnitude of how wrong they had been about my financial situation and my character, while Sophia was confronting the reality that she had called someone Deadweight, who was actually capable of solving the family's biggest financial problem without even making a significant dent in his own resources. "Marcus," my father said finally, his voice shaking with emotion, "I don't know what to say. We completely misjudged your situation, and we treated you unfairly based on our own ignorance and assumptions." "Son," my mother added, tears streaming down her face, "you were supporting us when we thought we were supporting you. How do we even begin to apologize for that?" I had planned for this moment for over a year, but I found myself feeling compassion rather than vindication as I watched my family grapple with the truth about who had really been the deadweight in our family dynamic. "You don't need to apologize," I said gently. "You raised me with values that made this success possible. You taught me to work hard, to be responsible, and to take care of family. I was just doing those things in a way that you didn't recognize or understand." But it was Sophia's reaction that mattered most to me, because she was the one who had used the word that had motivated this entire journey toward public vindication. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I called you deadweight. I said you were a burden on the family. And all along, you were." She couldn't finish the sentence. "You were wrong about me," I said simply. "But I don't need you to feel terrible about it. I just need you to understand that success doesn't always look the way you expect it to look, and that dismissing someone's value based on limited understanding can be incredibly hurtful." The conversation that followed lasted for nearly 3 hours. My parents asked detailed questions about my business journey, my financial situation, and my decision to help them anonymously. They expressed remorse for years of misunderstanding and promised to never again make assumptions about someone's success based on superficial indicators. Sophia apologized multiple times for her deadweight comment and for her general attitude of superiority that had characterized our relationship for years. She acknowledged that her corporate success, while legitimate, was dwarfed by what I had accomplished as an entrepreneur. "Marcus, I need you to know that I've learned something important about myself through this," she said as the evening was winding down. I was so focused on traditional markers of success that I couldn't see real achievement when it was right in front of me. That's a limitation in my perspective that I need to work on. As we were cleaning up after dinner, my mother pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Marcus, your father and I have been talking, and we want to pay you back for the mortgage," she said. "We don't feel right accepting such a generous gift from our son when we were treating you like someone who needed our help." "Mom, I didn't pay off your mortgage so you could pay me back," I replied. "I did it because I love you and wanted you to be free from that debt. The money doesn't matter to me, but your happiness and security do." "But Marcus, it's too much. We can't accept this kind of generosity from our child." "You're not accepting anything. It's already done, and it's not negotiable. Just enjoy your retirement and maybe try to understand that when someone loves you, they want to help in whatever way they can." David, who had witnessed this entire revelation as an outsider, later told Sophia that he had never experienced anything like watching a family completely reframe their understanding of one of their members in real time. He said it was both heartwarming and sobering to see how wrong people could be about someone they had known their entire lives. The weeks following the revelation brought a fundamental shift in how my family related to me and to each other. My parents began asking my advice on financial decisions and retirement planning. Sophia started seeking my input on her own career development and even began exploring the possibility of starting her own marketing consultancy. The transformation in our family dynamics was both immediate and profound. Where conversations had once focused on my supposed need for guidance and stability, they now centered around my expertise and insights. My father, who had spent years worrying about my financial future, began consulting me about investment strategies for his retirement savings. He would call me twice a week, asking questions about market trends, portfolio diversification, and long-term financial planning with the enthusiasm of someone who had discovered that his son possessed knowledge he had never recognized. "Marcus, I've been reading about cryptocurrency," he said during one of our Tuesday evening phone calls. "What do you think about Bitcoin as part of a retirement portfolio? I trust your judgment on these financial matters more than anyone else's." The irony wasn't lost on me that the man who had once questioned my ability to manage my own finances was now seeking my advice on complex investment decisions. But rather than feeling vindicated, I felt grateful for the opportunity to help him navigate financial choices with the same care and attention he had given me throughout my childhood, even when he hadn't understood my path. My mother's transformation was equally dramatic. She had always been the family's emotional center, the person who worried about everyone's well-being and happiness. But now her worry about my future had been replaced by pride in my achievements and curiosity about my business insights. She began telling her friends at church and in her book club about my success with a level of detail and enthusiasm that sometimes embarrassed me. My son Marcus built a company that helps small businesses manage their operations more efficiently, she would explain to anyone who would listen. He sold it for nearly $100 million, and he's been featured on national television as a business expert. But the thing I'm most proud of is that he secretly paid off our mortgage when he thought we were struggling financially. That's the kind of heart he has. The story of my anonymous mortgage payment became a cornerstone of how my mother understood my character. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the love and sacrifice it represented, the evidence of a son who had been thinking about his parents' well-being even when they had failed to recognize his own success and capabilities. Sophia's adjustment to our new family dynamic was perhaps the most complex and interesting to observe. As someone who had built her identity around being the successful, responsible sibling, she had to completely reframe her understanding of our relationship and her place in the family hierarchy. But rather than resenting my success or feeling diminished by it, she approached this recalibration with impressive maturity and self-reflection. "Marcus, I've been thinking a lot about our childhood and how differently we approached success," she said during a private conversation we had a few weeks after the revelation. "I always focused on external validation, grades, awards, recognition from authority figures. You focused on solving problems and creating value, even when no one was paying attention or giving you credit for it." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think I was so invested in being seen as successful that I forgot to actually become successful in any meaningful way. You built something that matters, that helps people, that creates real value in the world. I just climbed a corporate ladder that was already there." Her introspection led to concrete changes in her career approach. Within 3 months of my revelation, Sophia had begun developing a business plan for her own marketing consultancy, focusing on helping small businesses develop effective branding and customer engagement strategies. She asked for my guidance on everything from business structure to pricing models, and I was impressed by how quickly she adapted entrepreneurial thinking to her corporate experience. "I want to build something of my own," she explained as we worked together on her business plan. "I want to create value the way you did, instead of just fitting into someone else's system." The most significant change was in how they talked about my success with friends and extended family. Where they had once struggled to explain my unconventional career path, they now spoke with unqualified pride about my entrepreneurial achievements and my generosity to the family. At my cousin Jennifer's wedding in June 2021, I witnessed this transformation firsthand as my parents introduced me to extended family members and family friends. Instead of the apologetic tone they had once used when discussing my career, they spoke with genuine enthusiasm and detailed knowledge about my business accomplishments. "This is our son Marcus," my father said to my great-uncle Robert, a successful real estate developer who had always been held up as the family's example of business success. "He built a software company that helps small businesses manage their operations. He just sold it for $95 million, and he's been featured on CNBC and in Incorporated magazine as an expert in business technology." Great-uncle Robert's reaction was exactly what my father had hoped for: genuine impressed respect and a long conversation about entrepreneurship, market opportunities, and the challenges of building a business from scratch. For the first time in my adult life, I was being introduced to family members as an equal rather than as someone who needed patience and understanding. The story of my mortgage payment became family legend, told and retold at gatherings as an example of both my business success and my character. But it was also a cautionary tale about the importance of not underestimating people based on limited understanding or superficial judgments. During the wedding reception, my Aunt Carol pulled me aside for a conversation that perfectly captured how the family's perception of me had evolved. "Marcus, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years of regret. "I was one of the people who worried about you the most. When you were in your 20s and jumping between different jobs, I used to tell your mother that she needed to have a serious talk with you about getting your life together." She paused, looking embarrassed. I even suggested that maybe you needed professional help to figure out why you couldn't stick with anything long-term. I completely misunderstood what you were doing. Aunt Carol, you were trying to look out for me, I replied. Everyone was concerned because they cared about my well-being. No, Marcus, it was more than that. I was judging you based on my own limited understanding of what success looks like. I thought that because you weren't following a traditional path, you must be failing. I never considered that you might be creating your own path that was actually better than the traditional one. She looked directly at me with tears in her eyes. When I heard about the mortgage payment, I realized that while we were all worrying about your future, you were already taking care of the family in ways that none of us could have imagined. You were the most successful person in the family, and we were treating you like you needed our help. These conversations happened repeatedly throughout the summer of 2021, as various family members and family friends processed the reality that their assumptions about me had been completely wrong. Each conversation was a small revelation about how people construct narratives about others based on limited information and their own biases about what success should look like. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation was in my relationship with my parents during their daily routines and ordinary moments. My mother began calling me every Sunday morning, not to check on my well-being or offer advice, but simply to chat about her week, my business projects, and her excitement about my future plans. These conversations had a quality of respect and mutual interest that had been missing during my 20s. My father started forwarding me articles about entrepreneurship, business trends, and economic developments, often adding his own commentary and asking for my perspective on how these trends might affect different industries. He had become genuinely interested in understanding the business world from my perspective, rather than trying to guide me toward what he considered more stable career choices. 6 months later, in August 2021, BizFlow Pro was acquired by a major enterprise software company for $95 million. My personal share of the acquisition, combined with my other investments and business ventures, meant that I was financially set for life before my 30th birthday. But the financial success, while gratifying, was less important than the personal vindication of having proved that the family member they had dismissed as deadweight was actually capable of achieving success that exceeded anything they had imagined possible. At the celebration dinner following the acquisition announcement, my father stood up to make a toast that would stay with me forever. Marcus, when you were growing up, your mother and I thought our job was to teach you how to be successful, he said, raising his glass. We now realize that you taught us what success actually looks like. You showed us that real achievement isn't about fitting into other people's expectations, it's about creating value, solving problems, and taking care of the people you love. Most importantly, he continued, you taught us that family isn't about judgment and comparison. It's about believing in each other, even when we don't understand each other. Thank you for being patient with us while we learned that lesson. As I looked around the table at my family, the same people who had once questioned my ability to support myself, I realized that the best revenge had been no revenge at all. It had been the simple act of succeeding so thoroughly that their assumptions became impossible to maintain, and loving them enough to share that success rather than withholding it. The young man who had been called deadweight had not only lifted himself up, but had lifted his entire family in the process. And in the end, that transformation of pain into purpose, of dismissal into demonstration, and of assumptions into understanding, had created something much more valuable than any business success. It had created a family that finally knew how to value each other properly. The word deadweight was never spoken in our family again, but not because it was forbidden. It was never spoken because everyone now understood that it had never been true in the first place, and that the real weight in our family had been the burden of their own limited expectations rather than any limitation in my potential for success and contribution. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is not to prove people wrong, but to prove them so completely wrong that they have no choice but to examine their own capacity for judgment and growth. In transforming their understanding of me, I had given my family the opportunity to become better versions of themselves. And that, I realized, was a gift worth far more than any mortgage payment could ever be. 2 years after that life-changing Valentine's Day revelation, I found myself standing in the kitchen of the same house where I had once been called deadweight, but everything about the moment felt completely different. It was Thanksgiving 2023, and the familiar smell of my mother's turkey and stuffing filled the air, but the conversation around the dinner table had evolved beyond anything I could have imagined during those painful years of being misunderstood. My parents, now both 68, had settled into a retirement that was comfortable and stress-free thanks to their paid-off mortgage and the financial planning advice I had helped them implement. My father had taken up woodworking as a hobby, building beautiful furniture pieces that he donated to local charities. My mother had joined the board of directors for a non-profit organization that helped small business owners access funding and mentorship, a role she had accepted after telling them about her son's expertise in entrepreneurship. Marcus, Mrs. Rodriguez from the non-profit called yesterday, my mother said as she arranged the cranberry sauce on the table. She wants to know if you'd be willing to speak at their annual conference in January. They're expecting over 500 small business owners from across Ohio. The request was typical of the many speaking opportunities one received each month. After BizFlow Pro's acquisition, I had become a sought-after voice in the entrepreneurship community, but more importantly, I had used my platform to advocate for better support systems for people whose talents didn't fit conventional molds. I'd be happy to speak at the conference, I replied, helping my father carry the dinner rolls from the kitchen. Small business owners face so many of the same challenges I dealt with when I was starting out: people who don't understand their vision, limited access to resources, and the pressure to conform to traditional business models. Sophia arrived with David, now her fiancé, and their 6-month-old daughter Emma. The sight of my sister as a mother had added another layer of depth to our relationship, especially as she navigated balancing her successful marketing consultancy with parenting responsibilities. Uncle Marcus called out my nephew Tyler, Sophia's 4-year-old son from her previous relationship, running into the kitchen with the boundless energy that only small children possess. Mom says you're going to teach me about computers when I'm older. That's right, buddy, I said, lifting him up for a hug. But first you need to learn about problem solving and helping people. The computers are just tools for doing those things. Tyler's presence had become one of the unexpected joys of our transformed family dynamic. Unlike the adults who had needed to unlearn years of misconceptions about success and value, Tyler had grown up hearing stories about his Uncle Marcus as a successful entrepreneur and generous family member. To him, I wasn't the family member who had struggled to find his way. I was simply the uncle who built cool technology and helped people solve problems. During dinner, the conversation naturally turned to family updates and future plans, but the tone was completely different from those painful gatherings of 2019 and early 2020. Instead of worried questions about career stability or condescending advice about life choices, the discussion centered around collaboration, mutual respect, and shared excitement about everyone's projects and goals. David and I have been talking about expanding the consultancy, Sophia announced as we settled around the table. We want to focus specifically on helping family-owned businesses navigate succession planning and modernization challenges. Marcus, we'd love to get your thoughts on the market opportunity and potential funding strategies. The request for my professional input had become commonplace, but it still filled me with gratitude every time it happened. Not because I needed validation, I had long since moved past that need, but because it represented the complete transformation of our family relationships from hierarchy and judgment to partnership and mutual support. The succession planning market is definitely underserved, I replied, cutting into my turkey while considering her question. Most consultants focus on either the business strategy side or the family dynamics side, but rarely both. If you can develop expertise in bridging those two areas, you'll have a significant competitive advantage. My father, who had spent his career as an educator, had developed a particular interest in my philosophy about recognizing and nurturing non-traditional talents. He had begun volunteering with a local program that helped high school students explore entrepreneurship as an alternative to traditional college and career paths. Marcus, I had 3 students ask about you this week, he said, his voice carrying pride and enthusiasm. They're working on a business plan for a mobile app that helps students find part-time jobs, and they wanted to know if you'd be willing to review their proposal and give them feedback. Of course, I said immediately. Send me their contact information, and I'll set up a video call with them next week. I remember what it felt like to have ideas that adults didn't understand or take seriously. The comment was a gentle reference to our family's history, but it no longer carried any resentment or pain. Over the past 2 years, we had all learned to acknowledge our past mistakes and misunderstandings as part of our growth rather than as wounds that needed to be constantly revisited. My mother, who had become something of a local celebrity in her social circles as the mother of the successful entrepreneur, had used her newfound status to advocate for other parents whose children were pursuing unconventional paths. "I spoke to the parents group at the high school last month," she said, serving herself some green bean casserole. "I told them about our experience, how we almost missed recognizing Marcus's talents because we were looking for success to appear in forms we understood and expected." She paused, looking directly at me with the kind of love and respect that had taken years to develop. "I want other parents to learn from our mistakes and recognize that their children might be successful in ways they never imagined possible." The conversation continued for nearly 3 hours, covering topics ranging from business strategy and market trends to parenting philosophy and community service. But the most significant aspect wasn't the content of our discussions, it was the quality of mutual respect and genuine interest that characterized every interaction. As the evening wound down and we began cleaning up after dinner, Tyler approached me with a serious expression that was comical on his 4-year-old face. "Uncle Marcus," he said, tugging on my shirt sleeve, "when I grow up, I want to help people like you do. But I want to help animals instead of businesses. Is that okay?" The question was innocent, but it perfectly captured the transformation that had occurred in our family's understanding of success and ambition. Instead of trying to direct Tyler toward conventional achievements or traditional career paths, we had all learned to encourage his natural interests and help him explore ways to create value through his own unique talents and passions. "That's perfect, Tyler," I said, kneeling down to his level. "Helping animals is just as important as helping businesses. The most important thing is that you find ways to use your talents to make the world better for others. Will you teach me how to do that?" "I'll teach you everything I know about problem solving and building things that help others. But you'll teach me about animals, because I don't know very much about that." The exchange was simple, but it represented everything our family had learned about supporting each other's dreams and recognizing that success comes in many different forms. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and I was helping my parents load the dishwasher, my father pulled me aside for a private conversation that had become an annual tradition since the mortgage revelation. "Marcus, I need to tell you something that I think about every day," he said, his voice carrying the weight of reflection and gratitude. "When you were growing up, your mother and I thought our job was to protect you from failure and guide you toward what we considered safe, successful choices." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We now understand that our job should have been to help you develop the confidence and skills to pursue your own vision of success, even when we didn't understand it. You succeeded not because of our guidance, but in spite of our limitations." "Dad, you and Mom gave me the values that made success possible," I replied, placing my hand on his shoulder. "You taught me to work hard, to care about others, and to take responsibility for my actions. Those lessons were more valuable than any specific career advice could have been. But we also taught you that our opinion of your choices mattered more than your own belief in yourself. That was wrong, and I'm grateful that you had the strength to pursue your dreams despite our skepticism." These annual conversations had become a form of healing and continued growth for both of us. They allowed my father to process his regrets while also celebrating the man I had become, and they gave me the opportunity to express forgiveness and gratitude without minimizing the real impact of their earlier lack of support. As I drove home to my house in suburban Cleveland, a beautiful property with a home office where I now spent my time mentoring other entrepreneurs and managing my investment portfolio, I reflected on the complete transformation that had occurred in my family over the past 4 years. The young man who had been called Deadweight in October 2019 had not only built a successful business and achieved financial independence, but had also created a legacy of helping others pursue non-traditional paths to success. The pain of being misunderstood and underestimated had been transformed into a mission to ensure that other talented individuals wouldn't face the same dismissal and skepticism that I had experienced. My story had been featured in several business publications as an example of how families could learn to recognize and support different types of success. I had received hundreds of emails from young entrepreneurs who felt encouraged by my experience, and dozens of letters from parents who had changed their approach to supporting their children's unconventional dreams. But perhaps the most meaningful validation had come 6 months earlier, when Sophia had called me to share news about her marketing consultancy's success. "Marcus, I need to tell you something," she had said during our phone conversation. "David and I just signed our biggest client ever, a family-owned manufacturing company that wants help modernizing their operations while preserving their values and culture. The contract is worth more than I made in my entire last year at the corporate job. That's incredible, Sophia. I'm so proud of how you've built something meaningful and valuable. But that's not the most important part, she continued. During the meeting, the client mentioned that they had chosen our firm partly because they had read an article about our family story, about how we learned to recognize and support different types of success. They said they wanted to work with consultants who understood that the best solutions don't always look like what people expect. The conversation had brought tears to my eyes because it represented the complete circle of transformation. The family that had once struggled to recognize my unconventional success had become known for their ability to help others embrace non-traditional approaches to business and achievement. As I pulled into my driveway that Thanksgiving evening, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. The pain of being called deadweight had been real and lasting, but it had also been the catalyst for building something much more valuable than financial success. It had led to the creation of a family that truly understood how to value and support each other's unique contributions. The word deadweight was never spoken in our family again, but its absence wasn't due to avoidance or fear. It was simply because everyone now understood that the concept itself was fundamentally flawed, that every person has the potential to contribute value in ways that might not be immediately apparent or traditionally recognized. Sometimes the most powerful response to being underestimated is not to prove people wrong through anger or resentment, but to prove them so completely wrong that they have no choice but to examine their own assumptions and grow into better versions of themselves. In transforming their understanding of me, I had given my family the opportunity to become more wise, more compassionate, and more capable of recognizing excellence in all its forms. And that transformation, from a family that judged success by conventional standards to a family that celebrated and supported individual excellence regardless of its form, had become a legacy that would influence not just our own relationships, but the way we interacted with others in our community and professional lives. The best revenge, I had learned, wasn't getting even or proving people wrong. It was becoming so successful, so generous, and so fulfilled that the people who had underestimated you couldn't help but become better people themselves in response to your example. The young man who had once been dismissed as family deadweight had ultimately lifted everyone around him to new heights of understanding, compassion, and mutual respect. And in the end, that transformation of relationships and perspectives had proven to be worth far more than any individual financial success could ever be.